What's up and welcome in to Fantasy Baseball today on Thursday, December 14th. About to say Wednesday. I don't know what's going on. I am Frank Stampfl, joined by Scott White and Chris the Welsh. Last show, we recapped the top 20-ish starting pitchers from this past season. And today, we are taking a look at Scott's early 2024 SP rankings, trying to get through the top 30 or so, and a bunch of other interesting moves to talk about as well. Jung Hoo Lee did sign with the San Francisco Giants. He is a center fielder coming over from the KBO. And Tyler Glasnow was almost traded, is almost traded, might be traded by the time you're listening to this. Who knows? No time for salutations. We got a lot of pitchers to talk about. So I am just going to jump right into the rankings. And we are going to start with Scott's top 5 SP ranks for 2024. No surprise. You mentioned this on the previous podcast, Scott. There's, I think, a pretty clear top 7. And we see that same exact thing in ADP. So your top 5 is Spencer Strider, Garrett Cole, Kevin Gausman, Zach Wheeler, and Corbin Burns. Number 6 and 7, Luis Castillo, Zach Gallen. Your top 7, the same as the early ADP, just kind of moved around in different orders. So there you go. You're in lockstep, Scott. Does it feel good?
All right. For now, it's going to fall out of lockstep, I think, not long after this, but I think the top 7 is what it is for a reason. They are the sort of pitchers who provide you with both the volume and the dominance, I guess. That there are fewer questions. I would say these 7 are definitively ahead of the glob, and they're not the only ones in my estimation. But they're the ones I think everybody can agree are they transcend the glob.
Did you feel after the brand new mock draft that just happened, which you guys can check over at CBS Sports? You can check out the new write-up that Scott's got that we all took part in. Did you feel, I don't know, any pushback on your own personal ranks based on how that draft went, either in order or of any pitcher that maybe moved up that you weren't expecting or falling?
You know, I had a napkin with some moves I made. I was jotting them down as the draft was happening, but I don't think it happened with any pitchers, to be honest. I decided even before the draft that I wanted to move Yamamoto up a few spots, Yoshinobu Yamamoto up a few spots. So he's 16th for me now, I believe. But for the most part, no, I just go into this draft season and go into any draft understanding that I am prioritizing strikeouts in a way the consensus probably isn't. Obviously, strikeouts are a big deal for everybody, but I'm trying to elevate them even beyond that consensus.
And we will see that reflected in Scott's rankings coming up very, very shortly. Just wanted to point out with Corbin Burns, Wheeler, Luis Castillo, Kevin Gausman, as of now, they're all going within 6 picks of each other in ADP. So you got to make the decision on those names. Obviously, you're splitting hairs. There is a chance that all of them work out, but there's also a chance they might not all work out. So good luck making the decision on which of those pitchers to take. Welsh, I did want to ask you very quickly on Gallen because this came up on our previous podcast. Career high 243 2/3 innings this past season. That's regular season, postseason combined. Kind of came back down to earth a little bit in the second half. I know he pitched very well in the final World Series game, but the postseason overall wasn't great either. I think maybe kind of hit a wall in that second half. Do you worry about how many innings he just threw this past season?
Yeah, I do. Also because he had like a little bit of small downtick on the fastball. I guess it went back more to average. In 2022, the four seam was sitting around like 94. It was in the 93 and a halves. And the only reason I mentioned that is because like he's gone into spots where, you know, he's putting a little bit more focus on some of the secondaries. The changeup has become such a big, important strikeout pitch with him. And also, like, I felt like this was a year that you could feel the weight of the innings on him. He went through a really bad stretch towards the end. There was a period of time where everyone was like, oh, this is a Cy Young guy. Like Zach Gallen might really vie for the Cy Young. And that was completely gone. That was gone way before Justin Steele fell apart. And I think some of those inconsistencies are putting up massive innings. I think there were 25 total pitchers in baseball that had 180 innings or more. And like, that's That's not our father's baseball, you know? So it's like, you want to prioritize that volume. There's only so many pitchers. That is like saying, okay, everybody in a 12-team league could get 2 of these guys, but there's going to be someone that's going to jump the priority. All I'm saying is like, there's a little small extra value into guys that can actually go deeper. Because I think I said this a long time ago, the new 180 is like 150, you know, like where a guy would get to 180 in the past, that's like 150 right now. Like, you got to be comfortable with 150. That's not less than. But the new 180 to 200, that's like 250, you know? So like, we just have to change our markers. There's just so many few people that do it. And when you see a guy that does reach that and goes through some of those struggles, yeah, sure. I think it is definitely something to keep your eye on, but hopefully a better bullpen like they invested in is going to allow him to maybe not have to go 8, 9, and even 7 in some instances. That would be the best benefit for him.
All right. So again, we're through Scott's top 7 starting pitchers ranked for next year. Number 8, 9, and 10. We have Tyler Glasnow, who at the time of recording this, still on the Tampa Bay Rays. Number 9, Tarek Skubal. Are you kidding me? We'll talk about it. We'll talk about why in just a second. Blake Snell is number 10, who is currently a free agent. Tyler Glasnow, by the way, the reported deal on Wednesday morning from Ken Rosenthal, the Dodgers and Rays were discussing a trade that would send Tyler Glasnow and Manuel Margot to LA for Ryan Pepio and Johnny DeLuca. We haven't heard anything since, so we'll see what happens. Just focusing on Glasnow, what he does when he is on the field, because we know he's struggled with injuries, has never thrown more than 120 innings in the regular season. Among starting pitchers with 120 innings in 2023, 12.2 K per 9, second best. 25.8% K minus walk rate, second best. 16.5% swinging strike rate, second best. You see where I'm going with this. He's really, really freaking good. It's just, how long are we going to get Glasnow for? Scott, he's entering a contract year. Your thoughts?
Well, I think Tyler Glasnow here is the first representative of my change in approach to pitching this year, because in recent years, I might have been put off by the injury risk and deflated him in my rankings, actually ranked him lower than the consensus because of that. But I'm going, you know, with that focus on strikeouts and just feeling like it's so hard to get a difference maker at this position, I'm willing to put aside those concerns and shoot for upside and hope it works out. Hope I can get enough excess in that department that I can survive if Tyler Glasnow doesn't end up with a career high in innings. But you know, he did just have his career high in innings, right?
Yes.
Yes.
He threw exactly
120.
120. Yeah. And if you combine the postseason and some of the minor league stuff, it was 138.1. So
yeah. So, you know, you're probably realistically not getting more than like 140 or 150, and it's no guarantee you get even that, obviously. But pitch for pitch, I think Tyler Glasnow compares the closest to Spencer Strider of anybody. His xFIP last year was actually better than Strider's. It was 2.75. And obviously, those are the kind of skills that are going to translate no matter what team he winds up with, if it's the Dodgers or the Rays or somebody else. And so, you know, once you get past that clear top 7, I think Tyler Glasnow clearly the most talented pitcher, and that's why I'm putting him there.
You know, one thing to add on to the slider, I was looking at the slider ratings here on Glasnow that I think is really interesting that you were just talking about with Strider is I was looking at Stuff Plus models, and Strider had the #1 Stuff Plus of a fastball, I think the qualified pitchers at 141, but his secondary on the slider was 105. There were only 3 pitchers that had a Stuff Plus fastball of 125 or higher that also had at least one secondary that was a 125 or higher. And the list isn't even that much bigger if we just talk about like, you know, 100 and 125 on the secondary. And obviously I'm leading to Glasnow being that he had the 4th best Stuff Plus on his fastball, and his curveball had a 152 Stuff Plus rating. Surprisingly, the one thing, you know, jumping ahead here, Bobby Miller had almost identical, but had 3 in that range of Stuff Plus that was like 125. But the only 3 guys were Hunter Green, Bobby Miller, and Tyler Glasnow. So I mean, you're obviously talking about just not even needing for me to tell you, you know, this is an elite guy, but 33.4% K percentage only to Strider, just like Scott said. Walk percentage mirrored, just like Scott said. Huge, big stuff. Plus, we just need more innings. And it's like, oh my God, if you make him a Dodger, those are the type of team that could unlock more for him. We just need healthy innings from Glass now because the talent is there in droves. That's why it's easy to want to invest in him. The thing that takes you back is the constant injury worries with pitchers, and he's one of the poster children.
The one thing that makes me feel, I guess, a little better is he missed time this past season. Glasnow did, but it was with an oblique injury. It wasn't an arm injury, so it makes you feel a little bit better entering a contract year. And yes, I do get very pick and choosy with like the contract years that I like to highlight and the ones that I don't. But Blake Snell just had a contract year. What did he do? He won the National League Cy Young. So we shall see. Scott's number 9 starting pitcher is Tarik Skubal, who only made 15 starts as he was returning from flexor tendon surgery. But those starts were amazing. He had a 2.80 ERA, a .90 WHIP, 102 strikeouts, over 80 1/3 innings among starting pitchers with 80 innings pitched this past season. Skubal ranked 5th in ERA, 1st in FIP, 1st in XFIP, 1st in Sierra, 6th in K per 9, 2nd in K minus walk rate, 6th in swinging strike rate. So by all of those metrics, he was a top 6 starting pitcher across the board. And some people might think this ranking is crazy, but the early ADP has Skubal as the SP12 off the board. Steamer projections have Skubal as the SP5. So you guys are pretty much all in lockstep here, Scott. Top 12 starting pitcher. But he is another one. How many innings are we going to get? And I feel like that's going to be a constant theme.
Yeah, I mean, I think Tarik Skubal is he's more typical in terms of the buildup a young pitcher goes through at the start of his career. You know, he hasn't been in the majors that long. It's a little different from Tyler Glasnow, where it's just repeated injuries over and over again. He did have the elbow flexor surgery that cost Tarik Skubal the start of last year, but he came back from it throwing a couple miles per hour harder, and that's what's allowed him to take off here. And yeah, I mean, you say he was 1st in expected ERA, he was 1st in FIP by a large degree, I will point out, among pitcher. What did you use as the cutoff innings wise? 80, because he had 80 1/3 innings. Yep. Yeah, his expected ERA, Skubal's, was 2.28. 2nd was Pablo Lopez at 3.
Wow.
The FIP for Skubal was an even 2. 2nd was Sonny Gray, 2.83. Yeah. So he was blowing out the rest of the league in those measures. Great control, great strikeout stuff, and even, you know, the outings were a little short when he first came back from the surgery, understandably, but by the end he was putting up, you know, he was going 6 innings with consistency, and his effectiveness wasn't diminished at all. Pitches at a great park for pitchers. You know, you could ask for a better offense behind him, I guess, but I've already gone on the record to say Tarik Skubal is my bold pick for AL Cy Young. He's 9th in my rankings, but he's 1st in my heart.
And I was going to point out real quick, Welsh, even if you expand this to 2022, those 2 seasons combined, the past few years he's pitched, he's made 36 starts, 3.23 ERA, 105 WHIP, 10 K per 9, 48% ground ball rate, 13% swinging strike rate. So yes, he was like super dominant this year, but even if you combine his past 2 years pitching, he's been really, really reliable. I don't know if you've worked on pitching rankings yet, Welsh, but what do you think about the ranking for Scott here, SP9, and ADP, SP12?
Yeah, I'm going to have him. I am working on that right now. He is going to be between 10 and 12 for me. This is the general range. I actually think it's fascinating that you have him right next to Glasnow, because that's the question. I think those are 2 prime questions. The thing is like, I guess you get into a different range because it's like Glasnow goes and he's a Dodger and he just, you know, came off of this injury and presumably healthy. You want to give him that benefit of the doubt. But, you know, like you were talking about, you're talking about a lot of the expected stats too. I think you mentioned this, but also of that 80 innings qualified, he had the best Sierra in all of baseball of pitchers. He was only one of 2 pitchers to have a sub-3 Sierra, and the other one was Spencer Strider, and he beat Spencer Strider by quite a bit, almost 0.10 on the points, which is a significant margin. You don't see that type of jump on a lot of these guys. The K percentage was elite. The walks were elite. He also on the velo increases this year. He had the 10th highest fastball increase on overall for his velo. And what that did was that allowed him to kind of change that mix up, because he was more primary slider last year, dumb that down a little bit. Then you get that fastball pumping harder. His whiff percentage went up 2%. And then that changeup just started destroying people. So yeah, Skubal doesn't walk. He gets massive strikeouts. He's healthy. He's changed the mix. He's just a guy that feels like he popped out of nowhere with the Tigers. He's going to be one of those wake-up call players in 2024 for a lot of people when they're like, wait a minute, I have to take Ellie in the second. I got to take Skubal in like the fourth. I have to take Cole Reagans in the fifth. Like if you weren't here, if you weren't here with us, it's going to be a rude awakening if you're not already getting prepped.
I should have mentioned this earlier, but for the names that we recapped on the previous episode, we're obviously going to skip over those today. You could go back and listen to that podcast. Obviously, we're going to focus on the names here in Scott's rankings that we have not broken down yet, which brings us to SP 11 through 15. We're going to go through these in like clusters of 5, but Scott's 11th ranked starting pitcher, Cole Reagans.
Hello.
Followed by Pablo Lopez, Kodai Senga, Freddie Peralta, and Logan Webb. Cole Reagans, by the way, haven't heard that in a while.
The Ray gun.
Just turned 26 2 days ago. So happy belated birthday to Scott's man crush here. Former first-round pick from back in 2016. So it took some time here. Put up some gaudy strikeout numbers in the minors. Did struggle with control. He entered last spring training with the Rangers. He added big velocity last offseason. And he did credit Tread Athletics, who we've heard other pitchers working with in the offseason and gaining velocity. So same thing happened for Reagans. Then he was traded to the Royals for Aroldis Chapman, and he took off. Scott, I call him your man crush. You have him at SP 11. I know you want strikeouts. Just a heads up, the early ADP, Cole Reagans, SP 34. You have him at SP 11. Explain yourself.
Well, I think it's the neck and neck competition to see who has the bigger man crush on Cole Reagans between Nick Pollock of Pitcher List and me. And I don't know, maybe I was seeing so much of the Pollock hype matching my own on Twitter that I kind of assumed everybody was in on Reagans as the next big ace in fantasy. He's another example of me prioritizing upside in the pitcher ranks, because I mean, you won't find a pitcher with much more than that. Yes, there was the increase in velocity of about 4 miles per hour last year, which, you know, 1.5, 2, that's a lot. 4 is insane. And it was evident from spring training, and I kind of liked him then, but then he got stuck in that bullpen role for the Rangers and it wasn't going so well. It was only after he was traded to the Royals, he began working a slider into his arsenal. It became his best swing and miss pitch, but really he has 5 pitches that are capable of missing bats. A fastball that peaked at 101 miles per hour at one point, which you rarely see from a left-hander. It's more, you know, in the 98, 99 range, but still a really hard fastball for Cole Reagans. And yeah, from that time he took over in the Royals rotation in August. He was one of the best strikeout pitchers in baseball. Let me see if I could find that K per 9 rate. It was 86 strikeouts and 66 2/3 innings. So like an incredible rate. If there's a downside with Reagans, well, I mean, you know, obviously he has to prove durability, and he has had a couple, I think he's had Tommy John surgery twice. So that's, I guess, the biggest downside, but also there are control issues in his past. And for as much as he dominated during that 11 start stretch with the Royals, the last 4 starts, 6 walks, 2 walks, 4 walks, 4 walks. And remember, in one of those starts, he had like 3 wild pitches in a row. Yeah. Which seemed like, you know, it seemed like he was having some issues with the mound. So it wasn't so much like just misfiring, but even so, you know, that kind of raised an eyebrow amid the celebration of Cole Reagans' coming out party. But overall, the results during that 4-start stretch were still good. And there were still a lot of strikeouts, and it wasn't enough to turn me off to him. He's my number 11 pitcher and the highest ranked SPARP, if you're in a league where that matters.
Yeah, so again, that is a starting pitcher ranked as a relief pitcher, which on CBS you can use in head-to-head points leagues, and it's kind of like a cheat code. And obviously, Cole Reagans being ranked this high for Scott as a starting pitcher, he's going to be ranked really high as a relief pitcher as well. I think the big detractors of Cole Reagans, Scott, and you see that ADP push down is just being conservative for the reasons you mentioned. The lack of track record, the control, which has been an issue in the past. I think it's easier to make that argument for Skubal and Tyler Glass now, just because we've seen it a little bit more in the majors, and then obviously like uber dominance in Skubal's case. But I think that's just people kind of playing it conservative with Cole Reagans. We also wanted to ask you about Freddie Peralta. We did not get to him on our previous podcast. He is Scott's SP 14 in the rankings here. Wound up with a 3.86 ERA, which was inflated. Got himself into trouble with home runs this year. He allowed 6 earned runs on July 21st. From that point forward, Freddie Peralta was a league winner. 11 starts, 2.44 ERA, a .85 whip, 92 strikeouts to just 11 walks during that time, 13.2 K per nine, 1.6 walks per nine. He had a 251 FIP, a 16.6% swinging strike rate.
So why do I like him, right?
Dude, no, it's amazing, right?
Strikeouts.
But we do have some questions about shoulder issues in the past. We did see dominance in 2021, but 2022, not nearly as much. So we're kind of all over the place with Freddie Peralta. Do you think SP 14 in Scott's rankings is too high? Just right? What do you think?
I mean, these are Scott's ranks. Like and I'm not doing that as the cop out to be
for
like,
for what it's worth, the ADP is SP 13. So ADP is in line with Scott's ranks here.
Yeah. I want to chase strikeouts just like Scott does. I want to be beholden to them. It's the homers of starting pitchers. Big strikeout numbers carry you into the weeks with, for the most part, usually good whip numbers outside of, weird guys like Blake Snell and Cole Reagans, to be honest with you. Freddie Peralta has kind of been that guy before. If you remember in 2018, he had a 12.5% walk rate. So he's kind of like the path of what we've seen with some of these other guys. My problem of like being any negative to him is he was just so ridiculously dominant this past year. He increased his fastball by over 2 miles per, just around 2 miles per hour. The slider came with it as well, which is impressive. Also added around 200 RPM on that slider. So that baby was spinning a little bit more. And the whiff numbers ended up being really good. He actually, of his 4 pitches he throws, which are double-digit percentage, is 30% or higher on 3 of the 4 pitches, K percentage, 30% K percentage on the curveball, the slider, and the 4-seam fastball. The changeup just wasn't getting there. Those are really impressive numbers. And his walk percentage has dropped. I mean, we're talking about Cole Reagans in double-digit walk percentage. He had a career low 7.9% walk rate while having top 8 percentile K rate this year. I think we do have to take him and be real on him. I would take Peralta over Reagans right now. They both feel a little high. And I'm saying this while I'm like, I'm with you on Skubal. Like, I'm very much here on Skubal. Some of the like really massive injury control guys, like Freddie Peralta has some of those long-term control issues that stand with me and the injury stuff. So does Reagans. I probably don't reach as high and probably won't have as many shares as Scott and some of the others on specifically Reagans and Peralta. But I think we're in the general range. It's just a tiny bit too high to me. I think these guys are very volatile. It's going to be dependent on where in drafts you can get them. I want these type of risks a little bit later, I suppose.
Yeah, it feels that way maybe this year more than ever. I'd have to look at, the history of ADP, but just like guys like Reagans or even Tarek Skubal, we're taking Skubal inside the top 60 picks. While he was amazing, don't get me wrong, it does feel a little bit unproven for taking a pitcher that high. I want to take Skubal, but it's just like, it feels weird to draft him.
Is this also a collective? Effect. No, glob effect. I want to get your answer on this, Scott. This glob effect here, though, is like, to me, this also has the feel of like all these guys, maybe they have varying degrees of concern or whatever, but all these guys do this thing I like. So I'm going to throw them all up here. But like push comes to shove, are you willing to take like Skubal and Reagans, Reagans, Peralta? Like, are you willing to do that heavy invest? You know how some people be like, hey, I want Ellie, but I'm not going to like also go and take, like CJ Abrams, or I'm not going to also go and take O'Neal Cruz. You know what I'm saying? Like, are you willing to commit that hard to all of these players, or is it like, I just need 1 or 2?
So kind of my basic strategy in drafts this year, and I don't think it, especially in head-to-head points, but basically in Roto too, is I see about almost 4 rounds worth of hitters that are stud hitters, and I just want to draft nothing but hitters until the stud hitters are gone, the MVP caliber hitters are gone. And then I want to pivot and draft pitchers while the hitters are during that period in the draft when hitters are looking more interchangeable. Because I don't think the early round pitchers give you enough of an advantage. And I do think that this range of pitchers here offer upside to mimic that upper range of pitchers. More downside, obviously, but the kind of upside that can distinguish them from the glob still, which is why I'm emphasizing strikeouts. That's part of the reason I'm emphasizing strikeouts. Part of it is just because it's, a strikeout pitcher is going to give you strikeouts. And so if you target a bunch of strikeout pitchers, you can feel confident where you're going to finish in that category, while ERA and WHIP during this volatile time for starting pitchers is much dicier. So yeah, I mean, push comes to shove, I'll take that. In the drafts I've done so far, it hasn't worked out that I could get both Skubal and Reagans or Freddie Peralta. It hasn't worked out that I could get even two of those guys. But if it did, I'd be excited about it. I'm hoping with that approach I'm taking in drafts that I can get something like 4 of my top 25 or so pitchers. So I'm kind of making up for missing out on a true ace by giving myself a chance to miss on this next group of pitchers that's more volatile.
Yeah, and I'll point out in the first mock draft that we did this offseason, I took hitters in the first 4 rounds, and then in round 5 and 6, I took Skubal and Peralta, and feel great about the strikeout upside. But I gotta say, it did feel a little bit weird. I'm just like, do I have enough innings? Do I have enough, proven commodities here? And, I was kind of questioning that in the back of my mind. So I think it's a fair question and something we'll be talking about all off season. Let's take our first break. But before we do that, just a little programming note, a heads up that on Tuesday's podcast, we have not 1, but 2 guests joining us to talk about the glob of Scott's starting pitcher rankings. So a little bit of a tease there, and you'll find out next week. Let's take our first break, and we'll be back right after this.
Sunday, the race to the playoffs is on, with the Bucks heading to Lambeau to face the Packers, and key matchups featuring the Dolphins and 49ers. We can't wait. The NFL is on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
It's the fathers of the glob. That's who's coming on.
Oh, the
true fathers of the glob.
The glob fathers.
Whose term I apparently hijacked unknowingly, or maybe subconsciously hijacked by repurposing the glob, which was the term they were using for a range of the pitcher rankings in 2019, I believe.
Yeah.
Sounds about right.
I was going to say, does that make you the Godfather, Scott? But the Welsh jumped in with something even better. And
what did he say? I missed it.
That would be the Glob Father.
The Glob Father.
There you go. Yeah.
The Glob Father.
Yeah.
All right, let's get back into Scott's early starting pitcher rankings. And number 16 through 20, Yoshinobu Yamamoto, who is coming over from Japan, currently still a free agent when recording this. Number 17 is Max Fried, followed by George Kirby, Aaron Nola, and lastly, Framber Valdez is down there at number 20. Scott, I don't want to spend too much time on Yamamoto because I want to wait to see where he signs. Obviously, it seems like it's going to be a good team. The Dodgers, the Yankees, the Mets are all in on him. The Red Sox, the Giants. There's a bunch of teams bidding for Yamamoto right now. But a 25-year-old Japanese phenom, likely to get somewhere between $200 and $300 million. He has posted an ERA under 1.7 3 years in a row. And we're just not used to a starting pitcher that dominant coming over at this age, 25 years old.
Yeah, so I don't know how much you want to get into it, but Eno Saris of The Athletic wrote an article recently pointing out that MLB teams have gotten much better at evaluating pitchers from Japan, from Korea, from overseas, because of the data that's available now, where they can look at the individual pitching characteristics and have a better idea how it's going to translate. So misses in the past, like Daisuke Matsuzaka, are going to be fewer and farther between, is the hope. And he did an analysis of each of Yamamoto's individual pitches, and it sounds like it sounds like one of those, like, if you what would be the perfect pitcher? You give him the splitter of Kevin Gausman. You give him the Change up of I can't even remember who the other comps were.
It's like those memes. It's those memes that are out there where it's the perfect arms and the
right. And that's basically what it sounds like Yamamoto is. And then of course he has the numbers to back it up. And he's only 25 years old. Like, he's technically going to be a prospect this upcoming season. He's clearly the #1 pitching prospect in baseball. Seems funny to call him that, but as I'm going through my prospect rankings right now, that's top of mind. And yeah, I think he's, if I'm emphasizing upside, it's hard to think of too many pitchers who have more than Yoshinobu Yamamoto.
The only thing I want to add real quick is he had I think I mentioned this before. It's been said, was the one that cited it, but 4th best stuff plus in the WBC Yamamoto had. But also what I think is interesting is he's commonly been talked about also in like his unique, just kind of like physicality and some of the stuff that he does, his agility, and also the way he's kind of changed the way he pitches with like a high hold leg kick or some of the quick pitch stuff. All of this is to say he's been seen as like this is a cheap analogy, but like a Kodai Senga with command. And the reason that they do that is there are obviously similar arsenals in there because he also throws that fork ball. And just to throw this out here, Kodai Senga's #1 pitch from a whiff perspective, K percentage, was his fork ball. It was the 29th highest K pitch in baseball. Like of any singular pitch by any single pitcher, it was top 30 best K percentage. Now throw on a pitcher that is perceivably a better command fork and then have better stuff plus on the fastball with better overall command. That's the reason that the excitement exists out there. There's still so much to be seen, but that's where people are coming from.
Yeah, and if people want an idea of the early ADP on Yamamoto, 76.2 as the SP22 off the board. My guess is if he lands with like the Dodgers, that's probably going to tick up a few spots and maybe even catch up to where Scott has him at SP16. 2 other names here we have not talked about yet. Max Fried at SP17 and Aaron Nola at SP19. Max Fried, just rock solid. If you look at since the start of 2022, he's made 44 starts, 2.50 ERA, 105 whip, 8.6 K per 9. So it doesn't give you the gaudy strikeout numbers, but very solid across the board. And you look at, did want to point out with Max Fried, by the way, did miss time this year with a strained left forearm. So that limited him to just 77 2/3 innings. Entering a contract year, I think it's something that obviously we should have in the back of our mind entering 2024. And then Aaron Nola, who for some reason just hates odd years. I don't know what to make of it. He hates odd years. Look at his ERA by year since 2018. 237, 387, 328, 463, 325, 446 this past season. So you know what that means? It is time to buy on Aaron Nola. Maybe. That's just some.
Those are my favorite stats on the planet. I love those because it makes like really smart people super mad. Right. And I'm like here for that. I stare at that and I'm like, guys, this is clearly the other year. You have to buy Aaron Nola. History has told us that. There's no science to it, but it is right there in our faces. It's my favorite thing on the planet. Right?
Yeah, it's super sophisticated analysis, which you won't hear anywhere else. But what I will actually point out for Aaron Nola is that the strikeout rate has dropped 3 years in a row. The swinging strike rate has dropped 3 years in a row. Has trouble at times with home runs and obviously doesn't have the best defense behind him. Nola kind of has to toe this line more than other quote-unquote aces because he just doesn't have overpowering stuff. And, you know, looking into the strikeout rates being down and just the variance in ERA year over year, I just don't think I want to do the Aaron Nola thing anymore. There is no discount. People are drafting him as the SP11 off the board. Scott has him down at SP19. I'm probably going to be closer to where Scott is than the consensus right here. But any quick thoughts, Scott, on either Fried or Aaron Nola?
Well, I would say Nola's closer to the model of the pitcher I'm trying to draft this year than Fried, actually. So maybe if the consensus is higher on Nola, maybe I need to flip him around. I don't know. I mean, Fried is stable. Fried is, you know, a great source of ground balls, a great source of walks, or, you know, one of the better control pitchers. And that combines to make him a very safe source of ERA. And of course, he's a very safe reliable source of wins on the Braves, but he's not going to give you many strikeouts, especially when you factor in his durability issues. So I would say, I have Logan Webb 15th and then Max Fried 16th. Those are two that I'm kind of, I don't want to drop them too far down my rankings given their track records, but I'm not as eager to draft them because they don't have that big strikeout upside. Nola does. I mean, his strikeout rate has gone down, like you said, but still, 5 of the last 6 years, with the one exception being 2020, 200 plus strikeouts. I mean, you can't ask for better than that. And yes, he has a lower margin for error because of the velocity, the lower velocity. That does get him into trouble sometimes. But it seemed like he fixed that issue going into the playoffs last year. It was a mechanical issue that basically made it so he couldn't spot the ball on the corners to throw strikes. It had to be like right down the middle, and that made him vulnerable to home runs. I mean, it makes sense to me. And so, he seemed to fix that mechanical issue. We've seen it, a couple full seasons where he struggled with something like that. And so I think that does make him dangerous, but you're going to get the strikeouts with him. And it's a reasonably good chance you're going to get an overall ace outcome too.
I'd be very interested too to just see the pitch mix change, because he went primary curveball this year. It was 33% fastball, 26 curveball the year before. This year was 31.5% curveball, 29% fastball. And I wonder if this was about the lack of trust, or there was something gone in the fastball outside of just like clear velocity. We can always talk about that, but there was no actual full decline. And the reason I'm saying this is the year before he had an 88 exit velocity on the fastball. It was 91 this past year. The distrust in the fastball, having him throw more curveballs, might have been, especially if you're throwing him in earlier counts, might have led to some of those strikeout problems. So you got to wonder if there's something in the offseason that can be fixed on that, because he, I think, clearly knew the fastball, he was getting hit way harder, so he had to make that adjustment, and his strikeouts suffered from that. It seems like a very fixable thing, especially when there's no discernible like velo difference in the fastball. That thing is the same. There was something about it that was different this past year. Maybe also one of those, not that he's the type of guy, but you have shifts change and you just way pitchers kind of adjust. The fastball didn't work quite as much as it used to for him.
And I'm saying the theory seemed to be location was the issue because of that mechanical issue he was dealing with,
which was the fastball. Clearly, I mean, that because that thing he was the control on it. I mean, I'm looking here too on the heat map, not to keep going on about him, but on Baseball Savant, if you're looking at the heat map, that fastball heat map in 2023 is dead red middle. And when I say dead red middle, I am talking like it is boom. The last year it had a little bit more elevation on it, where the heat of the fastball was a little bit higher in the zone. This one was dead center. So command fix, maybe you get back to where Nola was. He also had a ginormous expected ERA difference between his actual. It was close to a full run, 3.71 expected ERA, which makes him way more serviceable. So I hate that you don't get a discount on him, because I would like that, because I'd like to buy. But what'd you say, it was 11?
SP 11 off the board.
That's the risk on that. Like, you need him to be SP 20, and you're like, sweet, because I can get back to top S15 SP. But I don't know, that makes it rough.
And I don't want to downplay this mechanical issue that he changed going into the postseason. He pitched very well in the playoffs, 2.35 ERA, 0.96 whip, a strikeout per inning. But as you pointed out, Scott, I mean, if we're making excuses for a quote-unquote mechanical issue, he's had that for entire seasons in 2 of the past 3 years. A 4.46 ERA or better, and you're drafting him as the SP11 off the board. So there's big upside, but in terms of like what he could do to your ratios over like 200 innings pitched, I think it's probably a little bit too much for me, but I'm sure there are people out there that obviously still do want to draft Aaron Nola that high. Let's move on to SP 21 through 25, and we have Justin Steele here, followed by Kyle Bradish, Max Scherzer. People might have been wondering, where is Max Scherzer? I haven't heard his name yet. Down at SP 23, ADP says not low enough. ADP is SP 37 for Max Scherzer. They are out. Joe Musgrove at SP 24 and Walker Buehler at SP 25. So a very interesting group of pitchers here, Scott. And I will throw both Scherzer and Musgrove your way together, because for different reasons. I mean, they both dealt with injuries this year. Scherzer obviously getting up there in age. He's 39. He turns 40 in July. I think we've kind of seen some signs here. The strikeout rate being down, the walk rate being up, struggling with home runs. The swinging strike rate, still very good by league-wide standards, 13.3%, but his lowest since 2014. So we are seeing the skills starting to decline now for Max Scherzer, and just consistently dealing with like these back and neck injuries. You know, ended the regular season on the IL, did Max Scherzer. Same thing with Musgrove. Musgrove has been great when he pitches. The past 3 years for the Padres, it's kind of like a metronome. It's the same thing year in and year out. He's really, really good. He ended the year on the IL with capsule inflammation in his right shoulder. So I kind of need to wait and see like Musgrove pitch in spring training and hear how he's doing and what the velocity looks like. But both of these two guys ended the season, the regular season at least, on the IL.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm just analyzing them on an individual level as opposed to trying to work them into my grand strategy at starting pitcher, then I would say I'm pessimistic about Scherzer and optimistic about Joe Musgrove. Scherzer really left a sour taste in everybody's mouth, it seems like, in the postseason, where he allowed 14 earned runs. Or wait a second, no, I'm including one from 2022. But he allowed 7 earned runs in 9 2/3 innings in his 3 postseason starts, all of them short. So he got knocked around in the postseason, did Max Scherzer. But fitting him into my grand plan, if I'm not stressing so much about upside, about downside, and really just selling out for upside, selling out for that big strikeout potential, Scherzer still delivered on that. He had a 10.3 K per 9 rate to go along with 3.77 ERA, 112 whip, which is certainly good enough for those Ks for this price range. I'm not going to be excited to draft him, but I want those strikeouts ultimately if the value is there on draft day for Scherzer, which it seems like it might be. As for Musgrove, I would feel a lot better if he did make it back before the end of last season from that shoulder injury. And remember, he was gearing up to come back, and the Padres just decided, nah, I mean, you know, we're out of it. Let's just shut him down. But for the time Musgrove was healthy, he was great. 3.05 ERA, 114 whip, right at a strikeout per inning. I mean, basically the exact same guy for all 3 of his years with the Padres. And because surgery's been ruled out on that shoulder, I guess that could change, but that's the story right now. Then I'm trying not to worry about it so much.
I love Musgrove, by the way. I just want to say he's going to be a target of mine this year. I think obviously the injuries played such a big role in everything that he was going through. The pitch mix changes I thought were fascinating. In a primary slider, then slider just took a back seat this past year in favor of where he was just going really heavy fastball, curveball. You could also argue like the definitions of sliders and cutters. He's kind of messed around with that. I have this very vivid memory in spring training of being next to the dugout during one of the training sessions and Musgrove talking about how excited he was about this changeup that he had been working on. He had a new grip on a changeup, and then it ended up being a good pitch, 40% whiff rate, the highest whiff rate of any pitch he had. And he ended up throwing it 11% of the time, which was up 5% from the year prior. I'm saying all this to say that like the fastball did weird stuff. Another heat map situation, I'll just tell you, is he was kind of like, you know, sitting middle of the zone this past year, the entire upper zone. And when I'm not just like maybe a little bit, it is the entire upper zone while he was messing with secondaries. You give, and velo was up. You give me a healthy Joe Musgrove with still 3 plus 30% plus whiff percentages. I didn't say that well, but 3 pitches that have a 30% or higher whiff percentage that he throws double-digit percentage of the time. I'm in for that, and I'm in for Musgrove, and he'll be a buy for me this year.
Yeah, it really just comes down to the shoulder and hearing more about, we probably won't hear anything about it until February when pitchers and catchers report. But if all reports are good, I think you're going to start to see him move up. So the ADP is SP30 off the board for Musgrove. I think people are kind of hedging their bets right now and waiting to see a little bit, which is kind of where I am on Musgrove as well. But if he's healthy, I agree. I think I would be a buy on Musgrove at that current ADP. SP25 we mentioned was Walker Buehler, who is 29 years old now, coming back from his second Tommy John surgery. And researching this, it sounds like, your second Tommy John, it has like a 60 to 70% success rate. And I feel like there have been more pitchers that haven't really come back the same as the ones that have. Now, there have been some, like Nathan Eovaldi has had 2 Tommy John surgeries. And
Cole Reagan's, baby, better than ever.
There you go. And Eovaldi has done it. He's done it for a while now. He just did it in the postseason. He was great this past season. So it's not impossible. And of course, Walker Buehler, still at a prime age, 29 years old. He was looking to return late in the season. He made 1 rehab start through 2 innings, topped out at 96 miles per hour on the fastball, which is good to see. And, decided against the return. Dodgers reiterated that he didn't suffer a setback or anything. They're just kind of playing it safe and saving him for the start of 2024. The last we saw, Scott, Walker Buehler back in 2022 didn't look like himself. The numbers weren't great. The fastball velocity has been dropping down over the past 3 years that we did see Walker Buehler pitch. He feels like one of the impossible pitchers to rank right now. So kudos to you for doing it. He's your SP25.
Yeah, it feels like the bottom of a tier, sort of. I said my top 25, I wanted 4 of my top 25, ideally. And I was kind of looking at where Walker Buehler ranked. I remember I did something similar with my Justin Verlander ranking his first year coming back from Tommy John surgery at an advanced age in his case. Yeah, I mean, I throw out 2022 for Walker Buehler because we came to find out he had ligament damage in his elbow. So, of course, he was not looking like himself. That makes sense. The year before, he had a 2.47 ERA and a career-high 207 and 2/3 innings. And I think was a consensus top 5 guy in fantasy, right? So, the hope is he comes back and is that guy again. And I think that's a realistic outcome for Walker Buehler. I'd feel more confident in it happening if it was the first Tommy John as opposed to the second. But he's still in his 20s. He's a young guy. I think that being a young guy and being as established as he is, I think both of those make it more probable that he's able to get back to pitching at a high level.
Can I ask one thing on him for you?
Sure.
I agree with what I think what Frank said is the best. Like, he's impossible. He's impossible to manage right now. The best thing that happened was the Dodgers not having him go back out. But this is also a pitcher that it's almost like he was like frozen in ice and woke up, and he's in a world where they don't have the shift and the bases are closer and there's a clock. You know what I mean? Like, he's gonna like appear into this world of this entire new baseball. The balls they're flying and all this type of stuff. And you look at Walker Buehler and you're like, okay, there's all of that plus the injuries. Is he a contingent player at all to you? With exactly what I said before, you're out here Wild West gunslinging, Scotty, I'm taking Cole Reagans and Tariq Skubal, and I got all these guys. You're going to also pull the trigger on Walker Buehler? Or do you think this is maybe the start of the contingency of like, well, let me take a look at what my roster looks like before I dive into the waters of taking a top 25 pitcher in Walker Buehler? Or you are just
I am not playing the category game at starting pitcher because I feel like it's a wild goose chase. I feel like ERA specifically is so unpredictable in this environment. I mean, yes, I have a stronger feeling that Max Fried is going to finish with a good ERA than that Aaron Nola is going to finish with a good ERA. But there are, for all classes of pitcher, there are so many extreme highs and lows in this environment, at least the way it played out in 2023. Maybe they'll be more adjusted at this point and it'll go smoother. But, I can only react to what I'm seeing. And so I'm just trying to target the one pitching contribution that I feel like I can predict, that I feel like if I emphasize that, I will win that category. But I'll probably take more talented pitchers who can hopefully wind up with a good ERA and whip just because they're avoiding damage on contact.
But I wasn't talking about that. I was talking risk reward of like, are you not scared about like injuries and all the other stuff? Like you're good.
Because I'm hoping to draft more of them. I'm
okay.
And so I'm not, my goal is to not be intentional about the pitchers I'm drafting in this range, to just take the best I think there is at the point where I'm looking to take one,
I think the problem, and I don't want to spend too much time on this because we do have some other stuff to talk about, and I think it's a conversation for another day. But the categories, Scott, it's not like K percentage category. It's volume too. So while you're getting these guys that are, I think, uber talented on a per inning basis, I think you have to factor in projecting innings as well. And maybe you have to kind of mix in some of these guys that are a little bit safer, because if you're just building out a pitching staff that has Glasnow and Skubal and Freddie Peralta and Walker Buehler, it's like you might get an average of like 130 innings from those guys this season.
Yeah. That's kind of what I was referring to. Yeah.
But when they go down, there is this vast glob to supplement from, and it is vast. It is like 60 to 80 pitchers deep that are more or less interchangeable in my mind. And a lot of them aren't even going to be drafted. They're going to be available out there throughout the year, at least in a 12-team league. Now, when you talk a deeper league, like a 15-team league, you can't count on even that caliber of pitcher to be on waivers to supplement with. So I see what you're saying more if we're catering to the deep league like that, where I might have to be a little more conscientious about who I'm taking and the balance of safety and upside. But I'm going to try to make it so I have enough enough in number that, if one or two of them don't pan out, it's not the end of the world. Like that's what I'm going to try to do. I haven't done a 15-team draft yet, so maybe I'll find out it's harder than I think it's going to be.
You became the fantasy Neil deGrasse Tyson there, by the way. We need like Photoshopped. You're like, in a vast world, a vast glob world, we can explore the depths of starting pitcher without fear. You just became you are our fantasy Neil deGrasse Tyson, Scott.
There you go.
All right, let's take our final break, and when we return, we'll get into those news items. No more starting pitchers because we don't have much time left. Let's do it right after this.
Well, you need your sports news anywhere?
We've got breaking news to bring you.
Then get your sports anytime you want them. Big trade news overnight to discuss.
Because we know you need sports all the time.
A lot of movement in the rankings this week.
A legend adds to their legacy.
We're bringing you that breaking news right here on HQ.
CBS Sports HQ, anywhere, anytime, all the time.
Welcome back in. We got to the top 25 of Scott's early.
Not bad.
Which I think is pretty good. And if we didn't have news to talk about, we would get through the top 30 or 35 or so. But we'll save those for next week. Again, we're not going to get into like the super deep names. We have all off season to talk about those. But my guess is we'll probably be able to get through like the top 50-ish by the end of our next podcast. Let's talk about some of the news and notes. And the Giants, we mentioned earlier, signed Korean outfielder Jung Hoo Lee to a 6-year, $113 million deal. And I hope he turns out to be a stud, because the Giants have been trying for years to land a big name. And I was watching MLB Network, and they're trying to hype this up like they finally got their star, which, I don't know, it felt a little bit disingenuous to me. Like they're just trying to prop up the Giants, but I hope it turns out that way. We'll see. Jung Hoo Lee is 25 years old, former MVP of the KBO. He played 7 seasons in Korea, and his career triple slash 340, 407, 491, coming off a year where he just hit 6 homers and 6 steals across 86 games, was dealing with an ankle injury to end the year, and hit a career high 23 home runs in 2022. So does have a little bit of pop. Will we be able to see that manifested in Oracle Park in San Francisco? My guess is probably not. But Scott, your thoughts here on Jung Hoo Lee, the player, and the landing spot with the Giants?
No, I'm not expecting much pop at all. I see highlights of him in Korea, and I've yet to see a home run. Like it always like bounces against the wall, and those are the highlights everybody's spreading around. And no, he was a career 340 hitter in Korea. Was Jung Hoo Lee. He had about twice as many walks as strikeouts over the last 3 years. Doesn't strike out much at all. It's a good leadoff profile, and I think that's going to be the main thing Jung Hoo Lee has going for him from a fantasy perspective, is he's likely to bat at the top of the lineup more days than not. But I'm not expecting much power production at all. In a way, it kind of reminds me of the conversations we were having about Masataka Yoshida at this time a year ago. But I think it's an even more extreme version of that. Less power even than Yoshida, more contact ability, probably. But basically what we're aiming for here with Jung Hoo Lee is like Luis Ariz. And that's a really fine rope to walk when you're contributing that little in home runs and stolen bases. Like, you need to really have a high batting average. It's tough to do. And so I think he's going to be pretty middling, is Jung Hoo Lee, for fantasy. Certainly for roto leagues. I like him more in points leagues, and actually took him as my third outfielder in our points mock the other day. But I don't think there's a really high ceiling here. It's more just for that format. He doesn't strike out much. And so, he can do the Stephen Kwan thing because of that.
The early ADP, according to the NFBC, is 359.4. That was before the signing. I have to imagine he will move up at least a little bit. Maybe it's 25, maybe 50 spots on the high end, because now that he signed. But do think he's a player, Jung Hoo Lee, better suited for a head-to-head points league. And Scott pointed out, drafted him 179th overall in our mock draft that we did yesterday. Real quick, I know Eno Saris contributed to a scouting profile that they wrote on The Athletic about Jung Hoo Lee. He threw out the comp Brendan Donovan on Twitter, and Welsh, it sounded like you were kind of in on that comp as well.
Yeah, this is just a funny story. I was on the phone with Eno when the news broke. We were on the phone, and he was like, "Hold on, Jung Lee just got signed with the Giants." I was like, "What?" And we started talking about it on the phone, and he dropped the Brendan Donovan thing. And a lot of that has to do, and then obviously tweeted it, has to do with a lot of the underlying stats. Launch angle, I think I have it up here. His actual thing was Brendan Donovan had a 107 max EV, 87 average, 6-degree launch angle, low K percentage. And in the KBO, you had Lee, who 88 average, much higher launch angle, bad contact percentage overall of like 95 plus, and just bad overall hard hit numbers. I think everybody's like taking the money and being like, this guy could be Luis Ariz, but he also could be just like Stephen Kwan. And I think that's the thing that we're not like really appreciating. He got a bunch of money because it's hard to get these type of players in the market. Yoshida is a fun comp, except they don't think the power is going to be there. It's points leagues and everything like that. I think Brendan Donovan's a great comp, except Brendan Donovan gonna probably be way more position eligible across the board. So I'll consider Lee him in a points league, but I'm probably not going to consider him in any category leagues unless we see something fun out of him in season. Maybe he's a pickup.
All right, the Royals signed Seth Lugo to a 3-year, $45 million deal, and good for him because he wanted to start this past season. The Padres gave him that opportunity, and he parlayed that into a 3-year deal. So love it for Seth Lugo. He turned 34 in November. He had a great year with the Padres. For someone that was undrafted in fantasy, a 3.57 ERA, a 120 whip. He doesn't put up these gaudy swinging strike numbers, but he has very good control, still has an elite curveball, one of the highest spin rates in all of baseball. The early ADP is 283, just behind Kyle Harrison, just ahead of Marcus Stroman. What do you think about that price tag, Scott? And here we go. Seth Lugo to the Royals.
Yeah, I don't love the landing spot. I mean, you could make the case maybe that Seth Lugo had sleeper potential when he could go anywhere. But since he went to the Royals, it's hard to see him improving much on the 8 wins he had with the Padres last year.
They unlock stuff, though. What about maybe unlock more velocity on the fastball, maybe more slider usage?
Cole Reagans is a rare example of that in the Royals' history.
Chris,
look, he'll be a safe source of ERA, will Seth Lugo, but I'm not sure he's going to be impactful for fantasy. I think he's slightly better than a streamer type, I would say, somebody to kind of round out your staff late in drafts.
Wins will be hard to come by, but it's a good park to pitch in. It's a great division to pitch in the AL Central. So, yeah, I think in those deeper leagues, if you do kind of need like a ERA whip stabilizer, like later on in your draft, I think he's fine in that regard.
Maybe somebody I need to draft in those 15-teamers to go along with all my risky guys.
Yeah, go along with your Scoobles and your Walker Buehlers. Get yourself a Seth Lugo. Maybe a little Michael Wacha, wherever he signs later. I totally agree.
Waka.
Yeah. Scott's going to wind up with like the back half of his draft is going to be just like Jose Barrios, Marcus Stroman,
Kyle Gibson, and just like Seth Lugo and
Lance Lynn trade. Let's go.
These don't seem safe to me.
The Pirates signed Rowdy Tellez to a 1-year, $3.2 million contract, which the name, the fit just sounds great. I mean, has there ever been a better Pirate named Rowdy Tellez? Old Blackbeard, Rowdy Tellez.
Yeah.
Sounds like
thought of that. Good point.
He should start versus right-handed pitching at the least. He was brutal this past season. Think he was playing through some injuries, but only 1 year removed from hitting 35 home runs and really good barrel rate. If nothing else, he will play a lot for the Pirates. And we just saw them do the same thing with Carlos Santana, and then they wound up flipping him, and that worked out for them. So I think in very, very deep leagues, as like a corner infielder, NL only type stuff, like he'll have some value. Welsh, any thoughts on Rowdy Tellez to the Pirates?
I think it's league specific. Yeah, it's like an L only league you're looking at. I'll be very curious to see what they unlock, because didn't we also see like Carlos Santana get significantly better once he left? So I'm just not really sure what we're going to get out of Rowdy. His bat has seemed to regress pretty significantly. The Ks went up this past year. He hadn't been an over 24 K percentage guy since 2019. That went up. He still hits the ball really hard, but he's not in like draft talk. He's a watcher. Watch him early on, see if the power gets going. Maybe it continues, because he will get RBI opportunities. And I'm kind of optimistic about like Brian Hayes this year. So if you get a few of those guys, Brian Reynolds, Brian Hayes, maybe actually there will be more RBI opportunities than most would expect.
Yeah, and Henry Davis as a potential sleeper. We'll talk about that in just a second. The Nationals signed Dylan Floro to a one-year deal, was a very strong reliever from 2020 to 2022, then kind of fell off a cliff this past season. Does have 32 career saves. My guess is he won't be part of the closer mix, but if the Nationals wind up moving on from a Kyle Finnegan, or if he struggles, or if Hunter Harvey gets hurt again, Floro is just a name where it wouldn't surprise me if maybe he factors in at some point. I don't think at the start of the season, though. 2 devastating injuries out of the Dominican Winter League. First up, Pirates catcher prospect Endy Rodriguez will have surgery to repair the UCL and flexor strain in his right elbow and will miss all of 2024, and apparently injured himself on a swing back on November 13th. I wonder if teams will start to put restrictions on these guys, because between Endy Rodriguez and Ronnie Mauricio tore his ACL in the Dominican Winter League, it's just like, I don't know. I just don't know if they want their players out there kind of, playing in games like this, but that's a conversation for another day. There were already rumors Henry Davis was showing up to spring training as a catcher, and I think this injury just solidifies that. Davis, former first overall pick from back in 2021, didn't look so good in his first taste in the majors, but he crushed it in the minors this year, and I think kind of sets up as like the perfect post-hype sleeper. Scott, what are your thoughts on? Well, tell me this, Scott. If Henry Davis already had catcher eligibility, where would you slot him in? Because I think he's going to gain that really early on in the season.
Yeah, I think he is too. I think the plan was still for Endy Rodriguez to be the primary catcher and maybe Henry Davis to supplement him behind the plate. So who knows how long it would have taken Henry Davis to regain catcher eligibility, but now it should happen pretty early. I would slot him 20th at catcher in between Tyler Stevenson and Austin Wells. I did move him up in my outfield rankings, so that's now where he is in my overall Henry Davis. And there's certainly upside for him to outperform Tyler Stevenson, but that's where I like him. And I do think that's the silver lining to this news. Obviously feel bad for Endy Rodriguez, but Henry Davis has the potential to be a bit even better fantasy option.
Yeah. So, all right, you said catcher 20, 21 in that range.
Yeah, 20. Yep.
Maybe I'm just taking the glass half full approach. I was thinking even earlier. I was thinking like the Logan O'Hoppe, Bo Naylor range. Maybe
okay, so you prefer them to Tyler Stevenson, Shea Langoliers, and Luis Campusano, because those are the 3 I have ahead of that range you're talking about.
Campusano's a good comp too.
I'd say yes to all those names. Stevenson actually like a little bit more, I think, than you do, but yes to every one of those names you just said, Scott.
What do you think about the Logan O'Hoppe, Bo Naylor range? Is that too high, Welsh? For Henry Davis.
To me, yeah. I'm not going to do that. I like both. But the thing that works in favor of Henry Davis is all this talk is about, hey, he's going to be catcher. He's still going to probably go in the outfield. And days that he's not catching, he's still going to get more games than a normal catcher. And that's the thing that we love. That's the thing. Dalton Varsho all over again. I've always been impressed with Henry Davis, even though the swing and miss is a problem. He showed that off in the AFL when I saw him, but huge hard hit numbers. The guy can run. And he's a total gamer. I think he can do both of those and get more at bats than the average catcher. So maybe I'm making too much about it. I'll take Bo Naylor over him. Maybe he is closer to Logan O'Hoppe. In my mind, they're the end of like that tier, and he's the start of the next tier. That's how I see it.
All right. Ronnie Mauricio, as I mentioned, was diagnosed with a torn ACL, will miss the entire 2024 season, which sucks. Obviously, suffered the injury on a stolen base attempt where he tried to stop suddenly, and he came up lame. It was obviously a non-contact injury. There were reports that Mauricio and Brett Baty would be battling it out for the third base job. And now, Scott, it looks like it's Baty's job to lose. The early ADP is 344.7. And my guess is that will shoot up quite a bit for Brett Baty.
Oh, I don't know. Third base is a pretty deep position, and he hasn't proven much at the major league level. I still think there's a lot of upside there. But I don't think he's going to be drafted in most 12-team leagues still. It would be my guess. Not unless he starts going off in spring training. I was shaping up to have so much Ronnie Mauricio, though. He was like going to be my default middle infield pick. Maybe this injury saves me from myself, since it sounded like they weren't so interested in playing him at second base. But yeah, that's a bummer for me.
Last news item I wanted to mention here, and a pretty unique one, just kind of came out of nowhere, at least for me. I don't know, maybe Welsh heard about it beforehand, but Jeff Passan reported that this spring will feature the first ever spring breakout, which is going to be a showcase of the best prospects who will play in spring training games together from March 14th to 17th, which sounds awesome. I think it's an amazing idea. I think now more than ever, fans are more in tune with prospects and the hype and getting excited about seeing young players play. So why not showcase them in the spring? And I think it's a great idea. Welsh, any thoughts on it? And did you know anything about it? Because it just kind of came out of nowhere.
I mean, I didn't know they were going to do this, but this has been happening. I actually tweeted about this over Passan, because the Padres and the Mariners have done this for years. And I tell this story that, when no one knew Julio, and I went to at Peoria Sports Complex, where the Mariners and Padres play. Every year they played this annual game in spring training where it was only the top prospects, and Julio was there, and he threw out somebody at third base, and everyone oohed and awed, but no one knew him. After the game, I grabbed him and I was like, Julio, that was insane. That was crazy. Again, this is 18-year-old Julio. And I'm like, that arm was crazy. And he looked at me and he was like, they don't know. They don't know. And then 2 years later, when I caught up with him again, because I've interviewed him and stuff, and so he recognized me, and we talked about, because he was the biggest prospect in the world. And I was like, do you remember they don't know? And he's like, they know. And we both joked about the they know now situation. So all of that fun little anecdotal thing aside, this has been going on, and that was probably a testing ground to this. And it's the most clear thing on the planet. They should promote the young players. That's the excitement. They have incentivized teams to bring them up. They're now showcasing them in better spots. They're going to do some other cool, unique things in it. I think this is fantastic. And you can go between, I think, March 14th and 17th to any of the ballparks in spring training, Florida or Arizona, and you can experience this. And I'll be there in March.
It's awesome too, because imagine the hype, right, for draft season, where if we have just prospect games going on, guys like Jackson Holiday and Junior Caminero, and they're just smoking home runs left and right in these games. Like, the helium in draft season is going to be insane. So yeah, it's a lot of fun, and definitely looking forward to that. We're going to wrap there for Scott and the Welsh. I am Frank. Thanks as always for tuning in to Fantasy Baseball today. Please make sure to follow and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify, and we'll be back again next week. Bye-bye.